everyone, and welcome to this webinar on indirect taxes, update and job work transaction and other imminent compliances under the various laws, especially the GST and the compliances required as per the new budget announced on 1st of February. So thank you all for joining today's webinar, and I would like to welcome our special speaker, Mr. Supreme Kothari, who is a chartered accountant and advocate, and has been involved actually with our industry for the last at least 10 years. I know of him. So he is well versed with the in-depth of our industry, and he has in fact contributed with his during his assignment with the ELP and ENY, etc., for our industry related issues, especially during the excise time when council was preparing its what do you call representations to get the excise exempted from gems and jewelry. He, when he was with ELP, was instrumental in preparing those representations, and we could get the excise exemption done. Likewise, 2 years ago, when hallmarking was at its peak and government was trying to implement and make it mandatory, we were instrumental in getting our exports exempted from hallmarking laws. And there also Mr. Supreme was very instrumental and very helpful, and he had guided us to prepare the representations. So from excise to hallmarking to road tap to, in fact, the IGCR rules, the equalization levy, there's so many issues which he has attended to in the past on our behalf and helped us to represent our case properly before the various government departments. So he's well versed with the intricacies of our sector. We are grateful to him to have joined us for today, and he will be there to tell you and answer your questions on various compliances, whether it is relating to GST or the announcements made in the job work. He also has a presentation to make. You can all see the presentation, and then you can raise your questions in the chat box. And my colleague Sudhir, who is with me from our office, he will also take up your issues, and one by one, Mr. Supreme will be able to give the clarifications or suggestions or whatever possible way out so that your concerns are met and you are able to undertake your work for export of gems and jewelry. So thank you, Mr. Supreme, for joining us, and I leave the floor to you now.
Thank you, Dugalji, for the kind introduction. Without further ado, I would straight away go to my presentation. Yeah. What I'm trying to address today are essentially some developments that have happened on the indirect taxes front, not almost entirely pertaining to the budget, but some developments in terms of judicial developments and some recent changes announced while passing the finance bill. So there were some amendments that were made not at the time when the budget was proposed in February, but some amendments were carried out while the finance bill was passed by the parliament some time back. And I would also like to talk about the job work transactions under GST, because of late we have seen some controversies that have arisen in relation to job work transactions. So we thought it is important that we relook at the job work scenario under GST. And because we are at a stage where we are moving into the next financial year, we will look at some imminent compliances that arise owing to the same. I would move to the first issue. The first issue that we are going to discuss about is the constitution of GST tribunal. जैसा कि हम सबको पता है, GST में एक फर्स्ट अपीलेट अथॉरिटी होती है और उसके ऊपर ट्राइब्यूनल होता है. So essentially, GST tribunal is the second appellate authority, but it's been over 5 years from the date of introduction of GST, but still, as of date, we do not have a GST tribunal. Why so? Because the extant provisions of constitution of the GST tribunal, were challenged before the Madras High Court in the case of Revenue Bar Association. There were some aspects which were susceptible to challenge, and those challenges were in a way upheld on 2 counts. One, the current provisions say and state that a member of Indian Legal Services holding post of not less than additional secretary for 3 years can be appointed as a judicial member. And 2, the number of technical members were higher, or rather currently are higher than the number of judicial members. So on these 2 issues, they were held to be violative of the constitutional framework and hence were struck down. Also, there was another associated issue which has also been subject matter of litigation, is the empowerment of state government in deciding the criteria for appointment of members to the tribunal. What I'm talking about is the technical member from the state side. So because of all these issues, we have not seen the tribunal getting constituted even till date. Now, what has been the consequence of that? बहुत सारे लीगल इंटरप्रिटेशन इश्यूज जो जनरली ट्राइब्यूनल के लेवल पे हमने पास्ट लॉज के थ्रू देखा है सेटल हो जाते हैं, क्योंकि ट्राइब्यूनल इज द फर्स्ट न्यूट्रल फोरम वेयर दे लुक एट द इश्यूज इंडिपेंडेंटली. वो नहीं हो पाया है. बहुत सारे इश्यूज कमिश्नर अपील्स तक जाके फिर हाई कोर्ट में पेंडिंग है, जो कि दूसरा मेजर कॉन्सिक्वेंस है इस इश्यू का, कि बहुत सारी रिट पिटिशंस, बिकॉज वी डू नॉट हैव अ ट्राइब्यूनल, all SSCs who have been handed an order by the first appellate authority have to knock doors of the writ court. So multiple writ petitions are pending before the writ courts across India. So their benches are clogged because of that. So these are the consequences. Now, thereafter, what happened? Thereafter, in June 2022, the GST Council formed a group of ministers to look into the legal framework of creating tribunals such that the recommendations to be made in terms of amendment that have to be carried out to the CGST Act provide parity between powers afforded to central and the state governments, A, and the provisions are also legally tenable. Matlab, they are not again set aside or quashed by any of the high courts. So basis that GOM, in the 49th GST Council meeting, the council has adopted the report of the GOM with some amendments, and basis the above, the finance bill, which has been now passed by the Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, has made those amendments. Now section 109 and section 110 of the CGST Act are proposed to be amended so as to overcome, amongst others, the factors highlighted by the Madras High Court. Now, obviously, it is hoped that as soon as the finance bill receives the presidential assent, which should happen anytime soon, today most probably, the constitution of tribunal is adhered to in a phased manner. Obviously, the provisions of section 109 and section 110 will become effective only once the amendments are notified by a separate notification to be issued by the central government. But it is hoped that obviously the tribunals, after the passage of this bill, will be in a way set up in a phased manner, but expeditiously. So what are the amendments that have been proposed now? So section 9, as I said, is getting amended, entirely substituted rather, so as to provide equal composition of judicial and technical members. Also, state benches are to be constituted based on requests made by the state government so as to provide more autonomy to the state government. And the concept of regional benches is being done away with, because earlier there was a concept of regional bench. Now you only have national benches and state benches. Now, the other amendment that has been made is section 110 of the CGST Act is proposed to be amended so as to overcome the other hurdle, that is, now on any member of legal services who is operating as an additional secretary for not less than 3 years cannot be appointed as a judicial member. So only now judges of high court or judges of district court or additional district judge, they can be appointed as judicial members. Now, other features include, and which are common, which were there even before, is that the principal bench, which will be sitting at Delhi, it shall be dealing with matters which involve, at least one of the issues involved is place of supply. So place of supply issues will go to the GST tribunal. Also, the president may decide to distribute the business among benches and transfer cases as he may so decide. And where the amount involved is less than 50 lakhs and no question of law is involved, the matter can be heard by a single member. The only point is that whether matter involves the question of law or not may itself become a question of law. So that's the irony of it. But still, that's how it is. But the tribunals may still take some time to be up and running. So what do we do till then? So what had happened is that sometime in March 2020, the government had issued a clarification to state that since the appellate tribunals have not been constituted, hence the time period for filing of appeal before the tribunal shall be counted only from the date the tribunal is constituted. That is what basically means is that the period of limitation shall not start for filing of appeal before the tribunal till the time the tribunal is actually constituted.
This is a very important point, Supreme, which you have made. I think members should make a note of it. But there will not be time barred, and their time would start once the tribunals have been formed. Is it, Anna?
Right. It was already there. I'm just re-emphasizing that so that
Very important.
members know what is to be done now. Then subsequently, certain governments like the Maharashtra government issued a clarification saying that if the first appellate authority has passed an order and the applicant does not file a declaration that he intends to file an appeal before the tribunal, even though it is not constituted, then recoveries will not be initiated. The sequitur to this is that if you file the declaration, then recoveries will not be initiated. That is what understandably it means. Now, in one matter, an SSC, Rochem India Private Limited, challenged the first appellate authority's order before the Bombay High Court. Bombay High Court took cognizance of this clarification and the affidavit that was placed on record by the revenue to say that while the tribunal has not been constituted, but no prejudice would be caused to the SSCs, took a cue that because of this clarification and affidavit, it is almost certain that till the time the tribunal is constituted, no recoveries shall be made. So effectively, Bombay High Court has clearly laid down that if you intend to file an appeal from the first appellate authority's order, and if you communicate that to the adjudicating authority, then no recovery should be made. Now, this is the position that we need to follow. In fact, in case of my few clients in other states, the department were trying to initiate recoveries because tribunal had not been constituted. There we placed reliance on this circular and also this decision, and they are now holding their hands on the recoveries, at least till now. But every SSC during the time frame till the tribunal gets constituted needs to assess the subject matter of the dispute as well, which is there in course of the proceeding, which is to be challenged before the tribunal. Because on some occasions, it is quite possible that because of the monetary amount involved or because of the nature of issue, you may still have to prefer an appeal or a writ petition rather before the High Court. There are situations as laid down by the Honorable Supreme Court in multiple decisions where you only have recourse to a writ court, which is where a fundamental right is violated or there is violation of principles of natural justice. Say, for example, you are not given a hearing, still the order was passed by the first appellate authority. There, I think you could still knock the doors of the High Court. If the proceedings are without jurisdiction, it is passed by an officer who is not empowered, or suppose the seizure was sanctioned by an authority who was not empowered to do so, it was empowered by a lower authority, or where the constitutional validity of a provision has been challenged. In all such cases, you can still think about, or explore the possibility of going to the writ court. So it is important to assess each matter independently. Now, the second thing that I wanted to touch about is the services of transportation of goods. Now, that does not directly relate to our sector, but as exporters, we do avail such services in respect of our export cargo or import cargo. Now, as you all must be aware, there was this exemption to export freight related cargo under the notification 2 of 2018, and the exemption was valid only till 1st October 2022. So last year ये exemption चला गया था, और उसके बाद फिर जो हमारे डोमेस्टिक ट्रांसपोर्टर्स थे, उन्होंने जब हमें ये सर्विस प्रोवाइड करी तो उस इनवॉइस पे IGST लगाया. वहां पे एक डाउट आया, क्योंकि और ये डाउट इस चीज का था कि क्या एक्सपोर्टर को इसका इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट मिलेगा. एंड द डाउट अरोज बिकॉज as per section 12(8) of the IGST Act, which prescribes the place of supply for different aspects, section 12(8) stated that where the service is of transportation of goods and goods are destined outside India, then the place of supply shall be the destination of the goods. which meant that for an exporter, when he is availing of transportation services from an Indian transporter, place of supply is outside India. But at the same time, because the supplier is based in India, the transaction was taxable. So the question arose as to whether an exporter who is based, say, in Maharashtra, can he avail credit of an IGST whose place of supply is outside India? This dispute arose and this was clarified via a clarification dated 17 December 2022 that indeed the exporter can claim ITC thereof. But still there was a gap in terms of the place of supply being outside India and still the circular clarifying that you can avail credit. Now that gap has been proposed to be amended now because section 12(8) of the IGST Act is being amended so as to exclude the linkage between place of supply with the destination of goods. So now, if you are availing transportation services from an Indian transporter, the place of supply ideally would be the location of the exporter and would accordingly attract CGST, SGST or IGST as the case may be. So this again is, I think, important. We have to take note of this. The other issue also associated with transportation of goods, which while does not directly impact the gem and jewelry industry, but it will have some amount of bearing, was that there was some disparity between the Indian transporters and forwarders vis-a-vis the foreign forwarders and transporters. The disparity arose because of section 39 of the IGST Act, which prescribes place of supply in a situation where either the supplier or the recipient is located outside India in relation to transportation of goods, which is destination of goods. So in case where the Indian transporter was providing services to the foreign exporter for an inward consignment into India, तो वहां पे क्या हो रहा था कि place of supply was becoming destination of goods, and hence the Indian transporter had to pay GST on that. But at the same time, if for the same service a foreign transporter was engaged, then because his location, the location of foreign transporter was outside India, the transaction did not attract GST. Now, this was causing some amount of challenge for the Indian transporters. So now, basis the amendment which has recently been approved in the GST Council meeting, 49 GST Council meeting, the finance bill has now included an amendment so as to delete entirely section 13(9). So now this disparity would not be there because the place of supply would fall back to the default rule even for transportation of goods, and it would be the location of recipient. So essentially, in that situation, both the foreign transporters and Indian transporters will effectively have the same tax treatment. It will not be taxable. But one associated issue that arises is that, say, now an Indian exporter engages a foreign transporter. With this amendment, what will happen is that the place of supply, which otherwise was destination of goods, which is outside India, will now shift to location of recipient, which is the exporter. And for that transaction, if the exporter has engaged services of a foreign transporter, there will be a liability to pay GST under the reverse charge in the hands of the exporters, which obviously will be available as input tax credit. But this is something which we should take note of here as well. All these amendments that I'm talking about will become effective after the presidential assent is received to the finance bill, and also after a certain notification is issued notifying those changes. So that is also something that we should be aware of. Now we next come to one other development. I think it was a couple of days back that I was looking at this judgment, and I thought that it is relevant that I include this in today's presentation. हम सबको याद है कि around March 2020 में CGST rules में एक draconian provision add किया गया था, which is Rule 89(4)(c). What was that? It stated that if you are an exporter and you are exporting without payment of GST under LUT, then for the purpose of claiming refund of input tax credit, the value of your export turnover will be capped to 1.5 times of the value of like goods domestically supplied, either by you or by similarly placed supplier. तो ये एक नया requirement आ गया था. उसके बाद एक clarification आया था 2021 में, जिसने इस सारे प्रोविजन को एक्सप्लेन किया, और उसमें उन्होंने एक इलस्ट्रेशन भी दिया कि किस तरह से डोमेस्टिक ट्रांजैक्शन के वैल्यू से आपका एक्सपोर्ट रिफंड का अमाउंट ऊपर नीचे जाएगा. नाउ स्पेसिफिकली फॉर द जेम एंड ज्वेलरी इंडस्ट्री, and in particular for the diamond industry, it was a very difficult provision to comply with, because essentially it is very difficult to find supply price of an identical diamond, or for that matter even gem and jewelries. So this was creating a lot of trouble. But over a period of time, with with interaction with the relevant authorities and also at an individual level, I think the entities have done well to sort of satisfy the officers with various documentation. I think refunds have started flowing, but still this has been an issue, because it obviously has added an additional layer of compliance, which involves high amount of subjectivity and discretion. Now, very recently, as I said, the Karnataka High Court, in the case of Tonbo Imaging, has struck down this provision. So it is very important that we look at the findings of the Karnataka High Court in this case. Now, what is the basis on which the Karnataka High Court has struck it down? And it's a very well-worded judgment, because in many ways it supports the sentiments of our industry also, which I'll refer to. पहली बात उन्होंने क्या कही कि जो जीएसटी का लॉ है उसके हिसाब से गवर्नमेंट का इंटेंशन है कि एक्सपोर्ट शुड बी जीरो रेटेड, एक्सपोर्ट लेग में कोई भी टैक्स होना नहीं चाहिए. इसके लिए जो ये रूल है वो ये पॉसिबिलिटी क्रिएट करता है कि एक्सपोर्टर्स का रिफंड अटक सकता है. दैट इज व्हाई दिस रूल इज अल्ट्रा वायर्स द सीजीएसटी एक्ट एंड द आईजीएसटी एक्ट फर्स्ट. Second, it was mentioned that this rule creates a discrimination between two classes of exporters. अगर आप export कर रहे हो without payment of IGST under LUT, then you are subjected to this rule. But if you are exporting upon payment, then you are not subjected to this rule. So it was discriminatory and it has been struck down because of that. The third point, which is in my third bullet, is very important because the court understood the importance of rotation of funds and how essential it is for the business, especially exports. So the court said that in exports, availability of rotation of fund is essential for the business to thrive. And the entire concept of refund of ITC would be obliterated in case limitations like these are imposed. Then the court also went on to say that this rule suffers from the vice of vagueness because the terms like goods, similarly placed supplier, they're not defined. There is no definition. So how do you go about it? And lastly, it is also mentioned that the rule clearly fails to lay down the consequences if you do not have goods or where you do not have a differential pricing policy. So think all in all, very good judgment. But if you look at the applicability, it is a judgment of Karnataka High Court. While Supreme Court in the case of Kusum ingots had stated, and it was an obiter, it was not a ratio, it had stated that if there is any law that is struck down by any high court, which is pertaining to a central law, then the decision shall be applicable across the country. But technically speaking, it was an obiter, and it is actually not in alignment with Article 226(1) of the Constitution of India, which states that a judgment of a high court shall have authority only till the extent its jurisdiction extends. So basically, if it's a Bombay High Court judgment, it will have validity in the state of Maharashtra. Nonetheless, this judgment, I think, gives a lot of impetus to the kind of sentiments we carry, and it will definitely have a persuasive value. The next issue that I'm going to discuss is a topical issue. Everyone on this webinar know that this issue is the bread and butter of tax authorities. Everyone who has received notices understands that if there is any mismatch between the input tax credit that you have claimed in your 3P versus the ITC that has been reflected by your supplier in GSTR 2A, 2B, as the case may be, you will receive a notice from the tax authorities. But in several cases, this discrepancy does not arise because there is some non-payment of tax or there is evasion of tax. This could also arise because of some genuine mistakes. Like, for example, your vendor has reported supplies to you as B2C supplies, or he has given you a wrong GSTI, or he has not reported transactions in GSTR 1 while he has reported them in GSTR 3B. Now, all those issues will arise. In fact, the Maharashtra GST authorities issued a clarification dated 25th February 2022 saying that if these sort of issues arise for the period 17-18 and 18-19, then taxpayers may support their claim by either procuring certificate from the vendors, CA certificates from the vendors, stating that the vendors have discharged GST and have reported the transactions if the ITC involved is less than 2.5 lakhs, more than 2.5 lakhs, or based on ledger confirmations that may be issued by the vendors themselves if the ITC is below 2.5 lakhs. Similarly, the CBIC also issued a clarification dated 27 December 2002, in which a similar modality has been prescribed for the period 17-18 and 18-19, which lay down a similar mechanism, but the threshold limits are higher in the sense that if ITC is 5 lakh or more, then you get a CA certificate from the vendor. If the ITC is 5 lakh or less, then you get a vendor confirmation from the vendor. But in addition to that, the CBIC clarification has also gone ahead and said that before sanctioning the claim of the SSC, the officer should also verify original invoices, receipt of goods, payment of consideration and tax to the supplier, and whether ITC is otherwise eligible because of the limitations under section 17. Like for example, if it is a barred ITC under 17.5 or otherwise. So these, while I would not say these are additional compliances, but these aspects will subject you to higher scrutiny. So it is important that we look at it, we consume this, and we are prepared for this. Now, as I mentioned, these clarifications were issued only for the period 2017, 18 and 2018, 2019. These 2 years were covered by the clarifications. Now, in case of several entities where notices were slapped for the period 1920, it was argued और ये बोला गया कि ये clarification पे आप rely नहीं कर सकते क्योंकि ये clarification तो खाली 17-18 और 18-19 के लिए है. तो एक कर्नाटका हाईकोर्ट का जजमेंट आया है रिसेंटली इन द केस ऑफ विप्रो, जहां पे हाईकोर्ट ने ये बोला है क्योंकि ये नेचर ऑफ मिस्टेक्स आइडेंटिकल है, नेचर ऑफ एरर्स आइडेंटिकल है, तो ये जो सर्कुलर है और उसका जो बेनिफिट है वो 2019-2020 को भी मिलना चाहिए. तो ये भी एक अच्छा जुडिशियल डेवलपमेंट है. तो अगर आपको ये इश्यूज आए हैं तो आप ये सारी चीजों का ध्यान रखिए, और अगर आपको इश्यूज नहीं भी आए हैं तो भी आप अभी से तैयारी कर लीजिए कि आपके जो ये पीरियड्स है उसमें क्या मिसमैच है, कौन से वेंडर्स है जिनका अमाउंट रिफ्लेक्ट नहीं हो रहा है, क्या ये इन कारणों से नहीं हो रहा है, और फिर आप यू कैन रीच आउट टू दोज वेंडर्स टू गेट दोज डॉक्यूमेंट्स सो दैट यू आर प्रिपेयर्ड. साथ ही साथ मेरी एडवाइस ये भी होगी कि इन इश्यूज पे जब भी आप रिप्लाई फाइल करते हो, आपको शायद से DRC 01 आएगा, ASMT 10 आएगा, आप जब भी रिप्लाई फाइल करते हो उसमें ये सारी चीजों के अलावा आप कुछ लीगल आर्ग्यूमेंट्स भी जरूर लो, क्योंकि आगे जाके हो सकता है कोई हाईकोर्ट का डिसीजन आए और ये बोले कि ये जो नेचर ऑफ कंप्लायंसेस है ये इस पीरियड में रिक्वायर्ड ही नहीं. तो 2 नेचर ऑफ आर्ग्यूमेंट्स हमें लेने हैं इसमें. एक तो ये कि अगर एक बोनाफाइड परचेजर है और उसने ट्रांजैक्शन एंटर किया है अपने वेंडर से और उसके पास इनवॉइस है, तो उसके बियॉन्ड कोई और ऑब्लिगेशन कास्ट करना उसके ऊपर इज ओनरस और वो लॉ के अकॉर्डिंग नहीं है. और दूसरा, ये जो मैच मिसमैच के प्रोविजंस है वो विदाउट जुरिस्डिक्शन है, क्योंकि कानून में, लॉ में, CGST एक्ट में एटलीस्ट फॉर मैच मिसमैच देयर वाज नो मैकेनिज्म till 1st January 2022, because 1st January 2022 is the date when for the first time section 16(2) was introduced, which stated that ITC shall not be available in respect of transactions which are not reported by the supplier in his returns. So उसके पहले अगर कुछ मैच मिसमैच हो रहा है तो उसके लिए और उसको बार करने के लिए कोई लॉ के अंदर, CGST एक्ट के अंदर, रूल में भले ही था बट एक्ट में नहीं था. तो ये आर्गुमेंट्स आपको मेरे ख्याल से लेने चाहिए. अभी एक और इम्पोर्टेंट जजमेंट आया था सुप्रीम कोर्ट का, तो आप सबने शायद देखा भी होगा. दैट इज ऑल्सो समथिंग दैट आई वांट टू ड्रॉ योर अटेंशन टू, which is the Supreme Court judgment in the case of Ecom Gill Coffee. Now, this is a judgment in the context of Karnataka VAT Act. उसमें क्या हुआ था कि जो डीलर्स थे उन्होंने कुछ प्रोक्योरमेंट्स किए थे और उस पर उन्होंने क्रेडिट लिया था, लेकिन टैक्स अथॉरिटीज ने उस क्रेडिट को डिनाई किया, ये बोल के कि जो आपके सप्लायर्स है उन्होंने रिटर्न नहीं फाइल किया है, टैक्स नहीं भरा है, उन्होंने ये क्लेम किया है कि ये सप्लाईज हुई ही नहीं है. तो उन डिमांड से जो एसएससी है उसने ट्राइब्यूनल में अपील फाइल करी। ट्राइब्यूनल ने उनकी अपील अलाउ करी, ये बोल के कि दे आर जेन्युइन परचेजर्स एंड दे हैव जेन्युइन इनवॉइसेस। उसके बाद एक रेफरेंस एप्लीकेशन गई हाईकोर्ट को, हाईकोर्ट ने भी उसको डिसमिस कर दिया। फिर डिपार्टमेंट सुप्रीम कोर्ट गया। अभी सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने क्या देखा कि कर्नाटका वैट एक्ट में एक सेक्शन 70 है, वो ये बोलता है द बर्डन ऑफ प्रूविंग that any transaction of a dealer is not liable to tax or any claim to deduction of input tax is correct shall lie on such dealer। और ये सेक्शन देखने के बाद सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने अपने कुछ पुराने डिसीजंस भी देखे थे इसी इशू पे। दिल्ली हाई कोर्ट का एक फेवरेबल जजमेंट था जो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने अपहेल्ड किया था अराइज इंडिया का। उसमें उन्होंने ये बोला था कि किसी परचेजर के ऊपर आप एडिशनल रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं डाल सकते जो कि उसके कंट्रोल के बाहर है। वो कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकता कि सप्लायर अपने रिटर्न भरता है, टैक्स भरता है, तो अगर परचेजर ने जेन्युइन परचेज की है, टैक्स पे किया है सप्लायर को, उसको क्रेडिट मिलना चाहिए। लेकिन सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ईकॉम गिल में ये डिसीजन को डिस्टिंग्विश किया और बोला कि दिल्ली वैट में सेक्शन 70 जैसा कोई प्रावधान था ही नहीं। तो इसके लिए देयर हैज टू बी an onus on the purchaser to demonstrate that he has actually received the supplies, he has paid taxes and the entire burden is on him because of section 70। यहाँ तक कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने ये भी बोला कि जो परचेजिंग डीलर है उसको सेलिंग डीलर का नाम, उसका एड्रेस, व्हीकल डिटेल्स, पेमेंट ऑफ रेट चार्जेस फॉर ट्रांसपोर्टेशन, ये सब चीजों का भी रिकॉर्ड रखना चाहिए जिससे कि वो अपना बर्डन डिस्चार्ज कर सकता है। तो ये डिसीजन तो वैट के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में है, तो मैं इसकी बात क्यों कर रहा हूँ? मैं इसकी बात इसके लिए कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि जीएसटी लॉ में भी एक सिमिलर प्रोविजन है विच इज सेक्शन 155। सीजीएसटी एक्ट का सेक्शन 155 क्या बोलता है? वो बोलता है कि व्हेन अ पर्सन क्लेम्स that he is eligible for input tax credit under this act, the burden of proving such claim shall lie on such person। Because of this provision, it is possible that the authorities will strongly rely on this judgment of the Supreme Court, though issued under the VAT laws, and say that since there is a burden on you, you have to satisfy beyond all means। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने एक चीज जो नहीं देखी और वो जजमेंट में वो पार्ट है भी नहीं कि कर्नाटका वैट एक्ट में भी कुछ अलग अलग सेक्शंस भी थे। सेक्शन 10 था और सेक्शन 11 था जिसमें ये बताया गया था कि एक परचेजर को क्या डॉक्यूमेंट्स रखने हैं फॉर टेकिंग क्रेडिट, which was basically in the sense that he should use the inputs in course of his business, he should possess tax invoice and he should file return। Ideally, section 70 should have been interpreted in the light of the requirements under section 10 and 11। That is one argument that was not actually followed by the Supreme Court, but one also has to see that under the GST law as well, there are more onerous requirements already in place. There are different layers of compliances. You know, there are provisions where there is match, mismatch and all of that. So in light of that, how much will this decision have a prevalence under the GST laws? One has to see. But at the same time, this provides an ammunition to the department. So for us, it is important that we are thoroughly prepared. We should ensure that we maintain all documentation possible to ensure that our ITC claims can be sustained. Now moving to the next issue. As you all must be aware, बजट 2021 में कस्टम्स एक्ट में सेक्शन 25(4)(a) इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ था। उसने क्या बोला कि जितने भी कंडीशनल एग्जेम्पशंस हैं और जितने भी एग्जेम्पशंस आगे इशू होने वाले हैं उनके रेस्पेक्ट में there will be an expiry date, so they shall be valid only up to 31st day of March falling immediately after 2 years from the date of their issuance। तो जिस दिन वो इशू हुआ उसके 2 साल बाद नेक्स्ट मार्च में वो लैप्स हो जाएगा। तो इससे बहुत सारे चैलेंजेस आ रहे थे क्योंकि बहुत सारे जो नोटिफिकेशंस है दे आर एक्चुअली issued to provide exemption in relation to say a foreign trade policy matter or in relation to India's commitment under a trade agreement with another country। So because of this, a need was felt that this exemption, this condition should not apply to certain nature of exemption। तो इस बार बजट में ये प्रपोजल आया है कि ये जो एक्सपायरी डेट जो है नोटिफिकेशन के अगेंस्ट दैट विल नॉट अप्लाई टू exemption notifications issued under a multilateral और bilateral trade agreements। तो हमारा जो अभी इंडिया यूएई सीपा में नोटिफिकेशन इशू हुआ है तो वो 2 साल में एक्सपायर नहीं होगा जब ये लॉ बन जाएगा तब। सिमिलरली ऑस्ट्रेलिया के साथ जो आया है वो भी एक्सपायर नहीं होगा. सिमिलरली इफ देयर इज अ नोटिफिकेशन पर्टेनिंग टू स्कीम्स अंडर द एफटीपी, तो जैसे कि हमारा 57 ऑफ 2000 है, 56 ऑफ 2000 है, दैट आल्सो विल नॉट बी ससेप्टेबल टू एक्सपायरी अंडर 25(4)(a). सिमिलरली री इम्पोर्ट्स, तो हमारा 45 ऑफ 2017 है, तो उसके लिए भी ये ऑटोमेटिक एक्सपायरी विल नॉट ऑपरेट. तो ये पोजीशन जो है ये एक्चुअली लास्ट ईयर बजट में टीआरयू में क्लैरिफाई कर दी थी. ये जो सनसेट क्लॉज है, वी डोंट वांट इट टू अप्लाई टू notifications issued under FTP or under trade agreements, but it did not have a legal backing. Now with this amendment, it finds place in the statute book and it has got the legal backing. एक और चीज जो हम डिस्कस करेंगे वो है मूवर. मूवर जैसे कि आपको पता होगा एक स्कीम है, मैन्युफैक्चर एंड अदर ऑपरेशंस इन अ वेयरहाउस स्कीम. उसमें क्या है, यू गेट अ लाइसेंस, यू अप्लाई टू द कस्टम्स अथॉरिटीज एंड यू गेट अ लाइसेंस अंडर सेक्शन 65 ऑफ द कस्टम्स एक्ट. तो आपको एक वेयरहाउस का लाइसेंस मिलता है, उसके साथ आपको एक प्राइवेट वेयरहाउस सेक्शन 58 का भी लाइसेंस मिलता है. उसके अंदर बेनिफिट क्या है, उसका बेनिफिट ये है कि आप कुछ भी अगर इंपोर्ट कर रहे हो तो उस वेयरहाउस के अंदर आप उसको ड्यूटी फ्री ला सकते हो. आपको बीसीडी आईजीएसटी पे करने की जरूरत नहीं है. और आपको अगर कैपिटल गुड्स का इंपोर्ट करना है तो भी वो आप ड्यूटी फ्री लेके आ सकते हो. अगर आपने जो इंपोर्ट किया उससे आपने जो सामान बनाया उसका आपने एक्सपोर्ट किया बाद में, तो आपको कोई भी ड्यूटी भरने की जरूरत नहीं है, क्योंकि एक्सपोर्ट ऐसे भी टैक्स न्यूट्रल है. और अगर आपने डोमेस्टिक सप्लाई करी तो जिस दिन आपने सप्लाई करी आपको उसी दिन ड्यूटी भरनी पड़ेगी, आपको इंटरेस्ट नहीं लगेगा. तो उतना आपको वेवर मिलता है इंटरेस्ट फ्री. तो अभी ये स्कीम वाज क्वाइट ल्यूक्रेटिव, बट अभी जो बजट का जो फाइनेंस बिल पार्लियामेंट ने पास किया है उसमें वो एक प्रावधान लेके आए हैं. दे हैव इंट्रोड्यूस सेक्शन 65(a). सो दैट नाउ states that this benefit of duty deferral or duty exemption will not be available in relation to IGST. तो अगर आप इंपोर्ट कर रहे हो इनपुट्स तो आपको बीसीडी का बेनिफिट मिलेगा, बट आपको आईजीएसटी का नहीं मिलेगा. अगर आप कैपिटल गुड्स इंपोर्ट कर रहे हो तो आपको बीसीडी का मिलेगा, आईजीएसटी का नहीं मिलेगा. तो बेसिकली इन अ वे इट इज स्लाइटली रिड्यूसिंग द एक्सटेंट ऑफ बेनिफिट्स दैट आर एसोसिएटेड विद दिस स्कीम. तो अगर हमारा कोई मेंबर मूवर का लाइसेंस लेने का सोच रहा है या उसने ऑलरेडी लिया हुआ है, तो ही नीड्स टू रीअसेस और असेस एज द केस में बी feasibility ऑफ ऑपरेटिंग अंडर दैट स्कीम. नाउ आई कम टू द सेकंड पार्ट ऑफ my session that deals with the job work transactions. So before we go into the issue, it is important to understand the legal framework under the GST laws. Section 143 is the most relevant provision because it provides the basis of how job work transactions are to be carried out. And Section 19 talks about the credit eligibility. तो Section 43 ये बोलता है कि कोई भी registered person, जिसको हम principal बोल सकते हैं, जिसके पास gold है, जिसके पास diamond है, वो job work के लिए भेज रहा है, can under intimation to the jurisdictional authorities send inputs without payment of tax to a job worker for job work and from there send to another job worker and likewise. तो वो जो principal है वो अपने premise से भेज सकता है goods for job work to one job worker और वहां से to other job worker. Now it also permits that goods, instead of being sent from the principal's premises, it can be directly sent from the supplier's premises, जिससे job worker खरीद रहा है, तो वो भी possible है. और Section 19, even if goods are going directly to the job worker without coming to the principal, Section 19 permits input tax credit thereof. Now अभी इसका framework जो है वो Rule 45 में बताया हुआ है कि किस तरह से ये ऑपरेट करेगा documentation wise. तो इसमें क्या बोला गया है, स्पेशली आई एम एक्चुअली लुकिंग एट ट्रांजैक्शन वेयर गुड्स मूव फ्रॉम वन जॉब वर्कर टू अनदर. तो वो जीएसटी लॉ क्या चाहता है, उसको कैसे रिपोर्ट करें. तो रूल 45 ये बोलता है कि अगर प्रिंसिपल का सामान इनपुट एक जॉब वर्कर से दूसरे जॉब वर्कर को जा रहा है तो इट शुड मूव अंडर अ चालान ऑफ ईदर द प्रिंसिपल और द जॉब वर्कर. दोनों में से कोई भी डिलीवरी चालान बना सकते हैं. ऑल्टरनेटिवली जो चालान प्रिंसिपल ने ओरिजिनली बनाया था वो जॉब वर्कर जो एक दूसरे जॉब वर्कर को भेज रहा है वो उसको एंडोर्स करके उस पे क्वांटिटी और गुड्स का डिस्क्रिप्शन डाल के भी सेकंड जॉब वर्कर को भेज सकता है. और सिमिलरली सेकंड जॉब वर्कर उसी तरह से उस चालान को एंडोर्स करके उसमें क्वांटिटी और गुड्स का डिस्क्रिप्शन डाल के थर्ड जॉब वर्कर को भेज सकता है. अभी जो चालान्स डिस्पैच होते हैं जॉब वर्कर को और जो जॉब वर्कर से रिसीव होते हैं, वो सारे चालान्स का ब्यौरा हमें ITC 04 में देना होता है, विच इज बेसिकली द इंटीमेशन अंडर सेक्शन 143। अभी मेरे सेकेंड सब बुलेट, जो पहला बुलेट है उसके सेकेंड सब बुलेट में मैं बात कर रहा हूँ एक इंटीमेशन की, सो दैट ITC 04 सर्व्स एज एन इंटीमेशन ऑन बिहाफ ऑफ द प्रिंसिपल। तो ये सारे चालान्स का जो ब्यौरा है वो हमें देना पड़ेगा इन ITC 04। किसे देना पड़ेगा? प्रिंसिपल को। तो जो प्रिंसिपल जो गुड्स ओन करता है उसको देना पड़ेगा। और इसका फ्रीक्वेंसी क्या है कि अगर प्रिंसिपल का टर्नओवर लास्ट ईयर में 5 करोड़ से नीचे है तो वो साल में एक बार भरेगा फॉर्म ITC 04 बाई 25th ऑफ द सब्सिक्वेंट फॉलोइंग मंथ, मतलब 25 अप्रैल तक। और अगर उसका टर्नओवर 5 करोड़ से ऊपर है तो वो हाफ ईयरली भरेगा बाई 25th ऑफ द हाफ ईयर। तो ये फ्रेमवर्क है। अगर आप ITC 04 का फॉर्मेट देखोगे जो एक प्रिंसिपल को फाइल करना है, तो उसमें क्लियरली उन गुड्स का डिस्क्रिप्शन देना पड़ता है जो दूसरे जॉब वर्कर से या दूसरे के बाद तीसरे जॉब वर्कर के पास जाके प्रिंसिपल के पास वापस आए। ओके, सो बेसिकली as per the GST law, the expectation is that the principal will track the movement of his goods across different job workers. Stated simply, he will have the details of delivery challans that are effectively issued at every level, and he will report all such transactions in his form ITC 04. CBIC का एक सर्कुलर भी आया था मार्च 2018 में, जिसने जॉब वर्क के ऊपर और क्लैरिफिकेशन दी थी। उसमें भी यही बात सामने आ रही है कि जो जॉब वर्क है वो जो जिसके गुड्स पे परफॉर्म हो रहा है उसको प्रिंसिपल कहते हैं। सेकंड बुलेट जो है मेरे सेकंड सब बुलेट का सेकंड सब बुलेट, उसमें जो मैंने बोल्ड किया है वो मैं पढ़ रहा हूँ, बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। सब्सिक्वेंटली ऑन कंप्लीशन ऑफ द जॉब वर्क बाय द लास्ट जॉब वर्कर, the principal shall either bring back the goods or supply, including export, the same directly from the place of business or premises of the job worker. तो expectation और एटलीस्ट GST लॉ की जो समझ है उसके हिसाब से वो ये बोलना चाह रहे हैं कि आपने अगर एक गुड्स जो है वो जॉब वर्कर के लिए दिया है, वो 4-5 जॉब वर्कर के पास जाके लास्ट में किसी ने एक प्रोसेस किया 5वां जॉब वर्कर, तो वो जॉब वर्कर इवेंचुअली वो सामान वापस प्रिंसिपल को भेजेगा और या फिर उस जॉब वर्क के प्रेमाइस से वो एक्सपोर्ट या सप्लाई हो जाएगा, जो भी केस है। काफी बार हमारे सेक्टर में ऐसा नहीं होता है, क्योंकि जैसे कि हमने अपना डायमंड सूरत फैक्ट्री में भेजा मुंबई से, सूरत से वो जॉब वर्कर के पास गया, अब वो जॉब वर्कर से डायरेक्टली मुंबई नहीं आता है, वो पहले वापस सूरत जाता है, फिर सूरत से वो मुंबई आएगा। थोड़ा सा डिफरेंस है, इट कैन बी एक्सप्लेन, बट आई थॉट इट इज रेलेवेंट दैट वी अंडरस्टैंड दैट दीज आर द एक्सपेक्टेशंस। सर्कुलर में ये भी बोला गया है कि जो फॉर्म ITC 04 है, जैसा कि मैंने कहा, इट सर्व्स एज एन इंटीमेशन अंडर सेक्शन 143। अभी GST रेट का भी एक बार देख लेते हैं। जैसे कि ये तो सबको पता ही है कि अगर आपके डायमंड्स के अलावा कुछ है तो उसके ऊपर 5% है जॉब वर्क का रेट, डायमंड्स है तो 1.5% है। और अगर जैसे कि आप जॉब वर्क का डेफिनेशन देखोगे सेकेंड बुलेट में, जॉब वर्क मीन्स अ ट्रीटमेंट और प्रोसेस अंडरटेकन बाय अ पर्सन on goods belonging to another registered person। तो आप अगर रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन के लिए काम कर रहे हो तो ही जॉब वर्क है। तो इसके लिए जो मेरी टेबल में थर्ड आइटम है, तो अगर आपने किसी कस्टमर जो आपका ग्राहक है बट वो बिजनेस में नहीं है, वो अनरजिस्टर्ड है, पर्सनल कैपेसिटी में आपको कुछ दे रहा है, तो अगर उसके लिए आप कुछ कर रहे हो तो वो जॉब वर्क नहीं है, उसके ऊपर GST का रेट 18% रहेगा। तो ये कुछ बातें मैंने क्लियर कर दी, सो दैट ऑन अ बैकग्राउंड लेवल वी आर क्लियर। तो अभी because of all what I have discussed, what is the summary of the relevant legal provisions? I have just created a summary so that we are on the same page. पहला है कि जो भी इनपुट्स एज पर GST लॉ जो इनपुट्स जाएगा प्रिंसिपल का, दैट शुड बी ऑन अकाउंट ऑफ प्रिंसिपल। मतलब वो प्रिंसिपल भेज रहा है, ऐसा लॉ समझ रहा है, ऐसे लॉ की समझ है। दूसरा, जैसे ही जॉब वर्क खत्म हो जाता है, भले ही वो पहले जॉब वर्कर का हो, दूसरा, तीसरा, चौथा, वहां से गुड्स प्रिंसिपल को वापस आने चाहिए या वो प्रिंसिपल वहां से सप्लाई भी कर सकता है। और इस प्रोसेस में जितने भी चालान्स बनते हैं, डिलीवरी चालान्स, आइडली वो प्रिंसिपल के ITC 04 में रिपोर्ट होने चाहिए। कुछ रिलैक्सेशन है चालान में, ITC 04 में कुछ रिलैक्सेशन है कि अगर जॉब वर्क का चालान बना ही नहीं रहा है तो क्या, तो भरने की जरूरत नहीं है। बट आइडली दिस इज द अंडरस्टैंडिंग एंड दिस इज द एक्सपेक्टेशन एज पर द फॉर्मेट ऑफ फॉर्म ITC 04। नाउ इसमें से एक बात जो निकल के आ रही है वो ये है कि जीएसटी लॉ में सब कॉन्ट्रैक्ट ट्रांजैक्शन का रिकॉग्निशन नहीं है फॉर जॉब वर्क, अभी जैसा लग रहा है। क्योंकि काफी बार ऐसा होता है कि मैंने किसी से सामान लिया, उसकी नजर में मैं जॉब वर्कर हूँ, मैंने वो सामान किसी और को दे दिया काम करने के लिए, तो मैंने सब कॉन्ट्रैक्ट कर दिया। तो माई कस्टमर शुड मे नॉट बी अवेयर दैट ही इज ऑपरेटिंग फॉर मी, ही इज ओनली कंसर्न्ड विथ हिज जॉब गेटिंग डन थ्रू मी। तो ये रिकॉग्निशन नहीं है, क्योंकि एक्सपेक्टेशन ये है कि प्रिंसिपल को हर मूवमेंट का पता होना चाहिए। लेकिन अगर हम एक नजर दोहराएं जॉब वर्क के डेफिनेशन पे, तो उससे एक और बात निकल के आती है, थोड़ी बारीक है, पर उससे ये भी पता चलता है कि जीएसटी लॉ के हिसाब से जॉब वर्कर शुड एक्चुअली वर्क ऑन गुड्स बिलोंगिंग टू अनदर रजिस्टर्ड पर्सन। बट ऐसा कहीं नहीं लिखा हुआ है कि जॉब वर्कर शुड बी कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअली एंगेज्ड बाय द प्रिंसिपल एज वेल। ये रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है। Contractually, he can be engaged by someone else also. The only requirement is that he should work on goods belonging to another registered person. It's very important because there's one controversy going around. When we come to that, this will become important. तो जो सर्कुलर इशू हुआ था उसके हिसाब से जस्ट क्या कंप्लायंस हमें करना है वो एक बार मैं जस्ट ब्रीफली बता देता हूँ. Obviously, this is something that you are doing day in, day out, but because there are issues that have been arising, we thought it could be a kind of a refresher for you all and just to validate the position in terms of the documentation being followed. तो जब गुड्स मूव होते हैं, आपने गुड्स भेजा जॉब वर्कर को, तो आपको एक डीसी बनाना है डुप्लीकेट में. उसके बाद जो डिलीवरी चालान होगा उसमें वो सारी चीजें रहेंगी जो एज पर रूल 55 ऑफ सीजीएसटी रूल्स प्रेस्क्राइब्ड है. अगर आपके इनपुट्स डायरेक्टली सप्लायर से जॉब वर्कर को जा रहे हैं तो उस सिचुएशन में गुड्स विल मूव अंडर इनवॉइस ऑफ द सप्लायर और द बिल ऑफ एंट्री एज द केस में बी. एट द सेम टाइम द प्रिंसिपल इज ऑल्सो एक्सपेक्टेड टू इशू डिलीवरी चार्ज. सेकेंड सिनेरियो कि अगर इनपुट्स एक जॉब वर्कर से दूसरे जॉब वर्कर के पास जा रहे हैं, तो वो मैंने ऑलरेडी बताया बट मैं फिर रिपीट करता हूँ कि गुड्स कैन मूव अंडर डीसी ऑफ ईदर प्रिंसिपल और जॉब वर्कर. ऑल्टरनेटिवली जो ओरिजिनल प्रिंसिपल का डीसी है उसी को जॉब वर्कर एंडोर्स कर सकता है, उस पर क्वांटिटी और नेचर ऑफ गुड्स का डिस्क्रिप्शन डाल के. और सामने वाला जॉब वर्कर भी अगर वो किसी और को दे रहा है तो वो भी ये प्रोसेस रिपीट कर सकता है. जब फिनिश्ड गुड रिटर्न हो रहे हैं तो क्या कंप्लायंस करना है. जॉब वर्कर रिटर्न कर रहा है तो उसमें आइडियली अगर एक ही कंसाइनमेंट में इनपुट गए थे और एक ही कंसाइनमेंट में इनपुट वापस फाइनल प्रोडक्ट वापस आ रहे हैं, तो इस सिचुएशन में द सर्कुलर इज सेइंग दैट द जॉब वर्कर कैन एंडोर्स द कॉपी ऑफ द डीसी दैट वाज प्रोवाइडेड टू हिम बाय द प्रिंसिपल. वो उसको रिटर्न कर सकता है उस पर एंडोर्स करके कि ये काम हो गया है, इतना क्वांटिटी है, इतना लॉस है, ये मैं भेज रहा हूँ. लेकिन अगर गुड्स आर बीइंग सेंट इन पीसमिल मैनर, बिकॉज काफी बार बहुत सारे डायमंड्स जाते हैं, असॉर्टमेंट होती है, फिर जो वापस आते हैं उसको लिंक करना भी मुश्किल होता है, तो उस केस में जॉब वर्कर को एक फ्रेश चालान बनाना पड़ेगा जब वो फिनिश प्रोडक्ट्स प्रिंसिपल को लौटा रहा है. उसमें वो ऑब्वियसली वो ओरिजिनल डिलीवरी चालान का भी रेफरेंस डाल सकता है. तो ये बड़ा बड़ा कंप्लायंस हो गया जो हमें करना है इन रिलेशन टू मूवमेंट्स. दो बातें समझनी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है अभी. एक तो ये है कि जो हमारे कारीगर्स है काफी सिचुएशन में वो अनरजिस्टर्ड होते हैं या तो वो लिमिट के नीचे होते हैं जनरली. तो जैसे कि आपने देखा बहुत बार जॉब वर्कर को भी चालान बनाना है, जॉब वर्कर को भी रिकॉर्ड मेंटेन करने हैं, तो ये कैसे होगा. तो उसके लिए while I can say that an unregistered person is not required to comply, but still the nature of these transactions require him to comply because it is in the interest of the principal. So they should adequately be trained and they should be equipped to carry out these compliances. I know it's easy to say this, but I think it's a need of the hour. Second, and this is very important, आपको याद होगा कि कुछ टाइम पहले आईजीसीआर रूल्स आए थे. उन्होंने आईजीसीआर रूल्स 2017, when I say IGCR, import of goods at concessional rate of duty rules, basically last year the notifications under which the gem and jewelry industry imports duty free for export purposes, especially the jewelry sector, which is 56 of 2000 and 57 of 2000, were subjected to IGCR rules. Thereafter, the IGCR rules were amended to say that if the importer, which in our case is the nominated agency, is providing the imported goods to an end-use recipient, which is the jeweler, then in that case, the end-use recipient, as per Rule 9.3 of the IGCR rules, will be required to maintain records in relation to, amongst other things, manufacturing. तो हमारा इसके ऊपर वेबिनार भी हुआ था, उसमें क्लैरिफाई किया था कि जीएसटी के लिए जो आप रिकॉर्ड बना रहे हो फॉर जॉब वर्क, फॉर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग एंड ऑल, दैट शुड बी सफिशिएंट कंप्लायंस फॉर दिस रिक्वायरमेंट आल्सो. तो आप जो अभी रिकॉर्ड मेंटेन करने वाले हो, डिलीवरी चालान, जो भी आप ITC 04, they will be equally relevant in case at some stage there is some clarification sought by the customs authorities in relation to the imports that you have made, claiming benefit in relation to the export transactions. So ये भी एक important point है. I thought I should bring it to your notice. कुछ issues और aspects जो job work transaction में आते हैं और जो हमने पहले भी जब GST इंट्रोड्यूस हुआ था तो ये सारी चीजें डिस्कस भी करी थी, बट सिंस वी आर डिस्कसिंग अबाउट जॉब वर्क, लेट्स जस्ट ब्रीफली टच अपॉन देम. एक जो चीज आती है रिटेंशन ऑफ गोल्ड. बेसिकली कारीगर को जो हम रेम्यूनरेशन देते हैं फॉर जॉब वर्क, there is also some amount of gold in terms of processing loss that may accrue to him. The position in that sense, if it is a amount that is being retained directly pursuant to the understanding between the principal and the job worker, that translates into a non-monetary consideration, and the job worker is expected to include that value in his consideration and charge GST thereon. So that is the position in law. It's quite clear. Just one second. So there is a need to assess this practice because I understand across India, in relation to job work transactions, there are different models that have emerged over a period of time based on practice, understanding of the trade. So there's a need to, just ensure and confirm that we are complying with the requirements. Now, there was a recent advance ruling that was pronounced for a similar issue, but I would treat it slightly different from a plain vanilla situation where the job worker is retaining some gold. So in this situation, the applicant was to receive an order for manufacture of gold ornaments or gold jewelry. He was to receive 1000 grams of pure gold, and as per the contract with the jeweler, the customer, there was a provision of 40 grams of wastage. So he was to provide him with a jewelry of 960 grams. The jeweler then subcontracted that arrangement to another job worker and agreed that the wastage shall be 30 grams. With this, what he did is that he ensured that owing to his contacts, his expertise and his knowledge of trade, he could get higher output or higher productivity is what his case was. And hence out of the 1000 gram of gold, he retained 10 grams and then gave the balance or was intending to give the balance to his job worker. The issue raised before the advanced ruling authority was whether GST would be applicable on this 10 grams of gold that is being retained by the applicant. The submission made by the applicant was that this benefit accrue to the applicant because of his experience, internal efficiency, bargaining power, and hence it was not directly a consideration received from the principal. Principal already had agreed for 40 grams of wastage. Now the authority, first they looked at the wastage norms prescribed in the FTP, and they found that while they apply to exports, they can also be applied to the domestic transactions as a matter of principle, and concluded that the wastage norms for gold ornaments is much lesser. In fact, it was 2.5%. It was much lesser than the agreed amount of wastage. Secondly, they noted that if there is a wastage which is in excess of the threshold prescribed in the FTP, that could be considered. If there's a wastage which is lesser in that sense from the FTP norms, then that can be considered as a consideration for taxable service, which could be in the nature of non-monetary consideration. So GST law clearly provide that if a consideration is non-monetary, then that also can be brought to tax because it is just another form of a consideration. The third aspect that the advanced ruling authority noted is that retaining a certain amount from the entire gold prior to putting it to job work is very different from incurring actual process loss or wastage in the course of the manufacturing process. And because of this, they held that this amount is liable to GST at the rate of 5%. Now, while principally it appears to be in order, I wanted to make one point, which is leave aside the gem and jewelry sector. There are multiple other sectors where, owing to production efficiency, advancement of technology, and other developments that have happened across the period, many benefits have accrued to the manufacturers because of improvement in expertise and quality of production, because of which it is quite possible that the production time goes down, or there is other efficiency that gets built into the system that provides benefit in the nature of monetary aspects to the manufacturer. In those situations, it is not being questioned that there is some consideration involved. Here also the situation, to my mind, is no different, in the sense that if the job worker claims or the applicant claims that he has some expertise by virtue of which a wastage which appears to be in the nature of 40 grams to the customer, or he believes that 40 grams of wastage is as per the norm, could be brought down by use of his expertise, then why should it be treated as a consideration in the hands of the job worker? This is a very, very nuanced argument. I am not saying that this would be sort of accepted by the authorities. In fact, it will not be accepted unless it is before the Supreme Court or the High Court. But this is just a food for thought, that can we position our arguments around this aspect in a way that we can also draw parity or comparable with other sectors that have also reaped the benefits of technology, experience, and expertise. That's the only point I'm trying to make. Yeah, so the next transaction that we are going to talk about, and this is also something that we have discussed previously, but just to recap, there are situations where the customer, who in his personal capacity would come to a jeweler and give, say, gold, diamond, gemstones, and tell the jeweler to make a jewelry out of it. How do you deal with that situation? There are two ways to go about it. One is that you can invert the material of the customer as if you're going to return it back and you're holding it only for the purpose of manufacturing the jewelry. And with regard to the supplies that you are making, gold and your labor charges, you can apply GST at appropriate rates. That's situation one. Second, you can treat the product or the item provided by your customer as a URD purchase. GST will not apply on that because the customer is not supplying this in course of his business. He is doing it in his personal capacity. And when you actually supply the jewelry to him, on the entire value, you can apply 3%. So based on the overall tax burden and based on the documentation that you have to justify the transaction, you can adopt any of these approaches. The other issue is mixing of alloy by job workers. So job workers often mix alloy while manufacturing jewelry. The question that arises is whether for that alloy that goes into the jewelry, there is also a need to apply GST separately because it's a supply of goods. So here, the answer is pretty clear. The job worker essentially is providing job work service. It could be construed as a composite supply where the alloy supply is only an ancillary supply and the entire transaction has to be offered to tax as if it's a job work supply. The last and the most important issue that I'm going to touch upon is something which has taken shape of a dispute in the recent past. The issue is where certain jewelers obtain gold from other jewelers and they hand it over to the karigars for manufacturing, get the jewelry back from them and supply it to the original jewelers who own the gold. In the process, certainly the said jewelers do carry out certain processes like testing of gold, quality check, maybe stone setting, kundan setting, and other processes. The question that arises is that the remuneration or the consideration that is retained by such jewelers, can it be said to be pertaining to job work? And can it be offered to GST at the rate of 5%? In this regard, I have already referred to the definition of job work earlier. I would like to refer to an FAQ issued by CPIC initially when the GST was introduced, and I'll read out. Job work means undertaking any treatment or process by a person on goods belonging to another registered taxable person. The person who is treating or processing the goods belonging to other person is called job worker, and the person to whom the goods belongs is called principal. So clearly, as per the GST law, it seems the envisagement is the job worker is a person who actually physically is dealing with the goods, who is treating and processing the goods. So it is essential that we look at our transaction patterns and we see whether we are conducting any process or not. But at the same time, even if no process is being carried out, will it be wrong to say that contractually, if the nature of documentation is such that the jeweler who is taking the contract steps into the shoes of a job worker, undertakes to carry out the job worker and remains responsible and accountable for the quality of the jewelry, then can he not be said to be the job worker contractually? And once that is established, subcontract to another person or a karigar is only a commercial arrangement which is very well recognized even under the GST laws. So I'll come to that. But before that, let's look at what has emerged in terms of the controversy. So I am aware that certain authorities in Mumbai, as well as some notices that have been issued in the southern part of the country, treat this transaction where the jeweler is only obtaining gold for being thereafter provided to the karigar for manufacturing, not as job work. They are contending that it is not a treatment or process carried out by the jeweler, and hence they are seeking to tax the same at the rate of 18%. Now this, please bear in mind that this is going to apply from 1st July 2017 onwards. So therefore, for everyone, there's a need to look at your transaction patterns, factual aspects, contractual terms, documentation that you have been issuing, so as to assess whether your transaction could be susceptible of being denied the status of job work. Now coming to some legal rationales or legal aspects that are relevant to this controversy, and these are just arguments. One aspect clearly is of contractual relationship. So it is a settled law that a transaction has to be examined and determined before ascertaining the taxability of the transaction. The true nature of the transaction has to be determined, and that can happen only based on evaluation of the contract between the two jewelers in our example. If jeweler A is giving the jewelry, the gold to jeweler B, with the understanding that jeweler B is contractually liable to undertake the job work and contractually liable and obligated for quality of the end product, then to my mind, he is a job worker contractually. Once that test is satisfied, then you can look at the concept of subcontract under GST laws. Now, while referring to the subcontract related concept, I would like to draw your attention to a clarification dated 20th September 2021. ये clarification जो है वो डायमंड सेक्टर या जेम एंड ज्वेलरी सेक्टर के लिए नहीं है. ये clarification आया था in the context of intermediary service. बट इसमें जो एग्जाम्पल दिया है वो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. उसमें क्या हुआ है कि ए ने एक एएमसी का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट बी को दिया, बी ने वही कॉन्ट्रैक्ट सी को दिया, तो इवेंचुअली जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट कर रहा है वो सी है. तो क्वेश्चन ये आया कि क्या ए बी सी तीनों जो है वो इंडिपेंडेंटली ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं या उसमें कोई इंटरमीडियरी है. तो सर्कुलर ने ये बोला कि यहाँ पे सी अपने अकाउंट पे सर्विस प्रोवाइड कर रहा है ए को, बट एक्चुअली उसकी सर्विस रेंडर हो रही है बी को, और बी जो है भले ही वो फिजिकली कोई सर्विस नहीं प्रोवाइड कर रहा है, बट कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअली बी इज प्रोवाइडिंग द सेम सर्विस टू ए. When we extrapolate this clarification to our arrangement also, it becomes very clear that in our case also the karigar is providing job work services to the jeweler who has received the gold, and the jeweler is providing same service to the other jeweler who owns the gold. That's my understanding. Obviously, it is subject matter to debate and interpretation. तीसरी बात जो इसमें देखने लायक ये है कि, and this is about intent, it is not about interpretation of law, वो ये है कि जब आपको याद होगा एक्साइज ड्यूटी आई थी 2016 में, तो उस टाइम पे एक कमेटी बैठी थी, अशोक लाहिरी कमेटी. तो उन्होंने क्या देखा, उन्होंने बहुत सारी चीजों को स्टडी करके एक्साइज ड्यूटी किस फॉर्म में हमारे सेक्टर के लिए इंप्लीमेंट कर सकते हैं, इसके ऊपर एक रिपोर्ट बनाई थी. तो उसमें कमेटी को बताया गया था कि हमारे सेक्टर में जॉब वर्क ट्रांजैक्शन बहुत सारे हैं, तो सारे जो क्लियरेंसेस होते हैं ज्वेलरी के वो जॉब वर्क के प्रेमाइस से ही होते हैं. और एक्साइज ड्यूटी वाज टू बी पेड एट द टाइम ऑफ रिमूवल फ्रॉम द फैक्ट्री। तो उसके लिए उनको ये बताया गया कि ये पॉसिबल ही नहीं है कि जॉब वर्कर कंप्लाई कर पाएगा जब वो गुड्स रिमूव हो रहा है, उसकी वैल्यूएशन भी पता नहीं है। तो बिकॉज ऑफ द वाइड स्प्रेड नेचर ऑफ दीज ट्रांजैक्शंस, it was recommended by the committee that excise duty should be levied not at the time of removal but at the point of first sale for the gem and jewelry industry. तो इससे ये पता चलता है कि ये सारे ट्रांजैक्शंस जो है हमारे सेक्टर में बहुत ज्यादा है, बहुत तरह से होते हैं, बहुत टाइम से होते आए हैं। तो अगर आज वन फाइन डे गवर्नमेंट based on legal interpretation takes a call that this transaction has to be levied to GST at the rate of 18%, तब क्या होगा कि आपका जो ज्वेलरी है उसके ऊपर तो 3% लग रहा है, और ये जो बीच में जिसको आप लोग इंटरमीडियरी कह रहे हो या एग्रीगेटर बोल रहे हो उसके ऊपर आप 18% पे लगा दोगे, तो पूरे वैल्यू चेन में आईटीसी एक्यूमुलेशन बहुत बढ़ जाएगा। तो वो एक एंगल है। इसके लिए जब जीएसटी लॉ में जब जॉब वर्क की रेट्स डिटरमिन हुई थी, तो ऑब्जेक्टिव ये था कि जो प्रोडक्ट का रेट है उसके अराउंड ही जॉब वर्क का रेट हो। इसके लिए जब ज्वेलरी पे रेट डिसाइड हुई 3%, तो जॉब वर्क पे 5% हुई। नाउ the last aspect which is also relevant is that in all these situations, and one needs to really assess whether each individual jeweler is doing any process, but what we have been given to understand is that each jeweler is doing some process or the other, like say quality checking, assaying of gold, ensuring safe custody, security of gold, quality testing and all of that. So कुछ ना कुछ process होता है, कुंदन setting and all of that. Job work का जो definition है GST law में बहुत broad है. It is not like excise कि उसमें नया प्रोडक्ट इमर्ज होना चाहिए, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग होनी चाहिए। इट्स एनी ट्रीटमेंट और प्रोसेस। इनफैक्ट गुजरात एडवांस रूलिंग अथॉरिटी ने इन द केस ऑफ मनोज भागवन मनसुखा ने ये कहा है कि इवन एक्टिविटीज लाइक स्टीव डोरिंग, ट्रांसपोर्टेशन, स्टोरेज, बैगिंग, दैट ऑल्सो अमाउंट्स टू जॉब वर्क। तो अगर इस नजरिए से देखा जाए तो इवन ज्वेलर अगर पूरी ज्वेलरी नहीं बना रहा है, वो कारीगर बना रहा है, बट थोड़े बहुत प्रोसेस वो कर रहा है, तो वो जो कर रहा है वो जॉब वर्क है। और जो कारीगर का कॉस्ट वो ओनर को पास ऑन करेगा, that can get added to his consideration by virtue of section 15(1)(c) of the CGST Act, which provides that incidental expenses incurred by the supplier will get added to the value of his consideration and can cumulatively be then charged to GST at the rate of 5%. So ये कुछ legal aspects थे, but as a concluding remark on this issue, I think we need to really assess what our transaction pattern is, what our documentation is, where we stand, so that we can decide on the future course of action. अभी क्योंकि लास्ट पार्ट पे मैं आ गया हूँ प्रेजेंटेशन के, क्योंकि अभी ईयर एंड अप्रोच हो रहा है और हमने जैसे कि देखा कि कुछ कंप्लायंसेस अराइज हो सकते हैं बिकॉज ऑफ द न्यू फिस्कल कमिंग इन टुमारो। तो आई थॉट दैट मे बी वी कैन जस्ट टच अपॉन फ्यू ऑफ देम व्हिच आर रियली क्रिटिकल। पहला, और इसमें से शायद बहुत सारी चीजें आप लोग कर भी चुके होंगे, बट फिर भी जस्ट फॉर सेक ऑफ कन्वीनियंस आई एम रिट्रेटिंग देम। पहला तो ये है कि एलयूटी जो हम फाइल करते हैं, एक्सपोर्ट अगर कर रहे हैं विदाउट पेमेंट ऑफ आईजीएसटी, तो एलयूटी हमें हर साल फाइल करना होता है, क्योंकि एक साल का एलयूटी एक साल ही एप्लीकेबल होता है, उसके बाद वो लैप्स हो जाता है। सो वी हैव टू फाइल एन एलयूटी। द पोर्टल इज ऑलरेडी enabled in the dashboard. You go to services, you can click on the filing of LUT option, you can file your LUT. सेकेंड ये है कि जिन एंटिटीज का टर्नओवर लास्ट ईयर मतलब कि 22-23 में 5 करोड़ से ऊपर था, पहले वो अपना HSN 4 डिजिट लेवल पे डिस्क्लोज करते थे, अब उनको 6 डिजिट लेवल पे करना पड़ेगा गुड्स का HSN इन योर इनवॉइस, इन योर रिटर्न्स एंड ऑल। नया साल शुरू हो रहा है तो ऑब्वियसली आपको यूनिक इनवॉइस सीरीज जो है वो आपको वापस से शुरू करनी पड़ेगी, बिकॉज लास्ट ईयर की सीरीज इस साल के लिए वैलिड नहीं है। ई इनवॉइस का भी एक नया एप्लीकेशन आएगा कि अगर आपका टर्नओवर लास्ट ईयर 10 करोड़ से ऊपर था, तो इस साल स्टार्टिंग 1 अप्रैल यू विल बी विद इन द फोल्ड ऑफ ई इनवॉइसिंग। सेकेंड लास्ट इशू इज ITC 04. आई हैव ऑलरेडी सेड दैट 22-23 का ITC 04 जो है उसकी ड्यू डेट 25 अप्रैल 2023 रहेगी। अगर आपका टर्नओवर 5 करोड़ से नीचे था तो आपको एनुअल फाइल करना पड़ेगा, और अगर आपका टर्नओवर 5 करोड़ से ऊपर है तो ऑलरेडी आपने फर्स्ट हाफ ऑफ 22-23 के लिए फाइल किया होगा, आपको सेकेंड हाफ के लिए बाय 25 अप्रैल फाइल करना पड़ेगा। लास्ट पॉइंट इज इन रिलेशन टू रूल 42 एंड 43 ऑफ द CGST रूल्स। तो आपका जो कॉमन इनपुट टैक्स क्रेडिट होता है, काफी बार ऐसा होता है कि आप कुछ एग्जाम सप्लाईज प्रोवाइड करते हैं। फॉर एग्जाम्पल, अगर आप सिक्योरिटीज में ट्रेड कर रहे हैं, आपने एफएनओ में ट्रेड किया, म्यूचुअल फंड में ट्रेड किया, तो वो सारे जो ट्रांजैक्शंस होते हैं उसको एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाई माना जाता है फॉर द पर्पसेस ऑफ रिवर्सल ऑफ योर कॉमन आईटीसी. सेकेंडली, अगर आपने कोई इमूवेबल प्रॉपर्टी या लैंड बेचा है तो वो सब ट्रांजैक्शन ऑल्सो कैन बी कंस्ट्रूड एज एग्जेम्प्ट ट्रांजैक्शन. तो आपका जो कॉमन इनपुट क्रेडिट है, मंथ ऑन मंथ आपको देखना पड़ता है कि आपकी एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाईज और एग्जेम्प्ट सप्लाईज का वैल्यू कितना है और डोमेस्टिक सप्लाईज कितनी है, और जितना भी कॉमन आईटीसी इज एट्रीब्यूटेबल टू एग्जेम्प्ट नेचर ऑफ ट्रांजैक्शंस दैट हैज टू बी रिवर्स मंथ ऑन मंथ. आपने मंथ ऑन मंथ जो रिवर्सल करते हैं वो आप उस मंथ के टर्नओवर के हिसाब से करते हैं, लेकिन साल के एंड में आपको वापस से, बिकॉज पूरे साल में आप बहुत सारे डेबिट नोट्स, क्रेडिट नोट्स, एडजस्टमेंट्स करते हो, तो पूरे साल के एंड में आपको वापस एक बार बेस्ड ऑन योर एनुअल टर्नओवर वो वैल्यू को रिविजिट करना पड़ता है. अगर एक्सेस रिवर्सल कर दिया है तो आप उसको रिक्रेडिट कर सकते हो, अगर आपने कम किया है तो आप उसको भर सकते हो, लेकिन 1 अप्रैल के बाद से आपके ऊपर इंटरेस्ट अप्लाई हो जाएगा अगर आपने 1 अप्रैल के बियॉन्ड पेमेंट किया. सो दीज आर द फ्यू इमिनेंट कंप्लायंसेस, एंड विद दिस I come to the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Supreme, for a very detailed presentation touching various aspects of our sector, right from setting up and the need for appellate tribunals to the Karnataka High Court's decision on Road 89-4, the benefits of the mover scheme, and the various implications of job work to aggregators or these job workers.
Right.
So really appreciate your in-depth presentation. I think we can take up the questions which the members have raised.
Yeah, sure.
The first question raised is by Mr. Prakash Pichai. He says, this is regarding the IGST on freight forwarders. He says, in case my overseas buyer arranges to lift the goods through his freight agent and pays to the later in foreign land, then what will be the implication?
So then in that situation, your overseas buyer is outside India, your freight forwarder is also outside India. Even while the place of supply is in India, the supplier is not located in India, so that transaction would not be liable to GST.
Second is, if we sell through post and by e-commerce, what will be the GST compliance in export and in domestic sale?
Yeah, so basically, in that situation, you will be governed by 12(8) of the IGST Act, ideally. There, basically, the place of supply is linked to the location of the recipient, and because you are in India, you will have a liability to pay IGST or CGST and SGST as the case may be. And basis that, while there will be a GST, but because you are making exports, you will be eligible to claim refund of the correlated ITC.
In case he is exporting through e-commerce, then he can also export under LUT and not in pay and no need
No,
for record also.
The question I think is not in relation to the export per se, but the question is in relation to freight charges. So I was talking about the
freight.
Obviously, exports are zero rated, so he can export under LUT.
Okay. So the next question is, does job work process be the same if it is B2B or B2C? Suppose an unregistered customer gives us old jewelry and gets new one. I think this is what you had explained. So maybe
correct. So I can just reiterate. If you are talking about the documentation, then obviously the transaction does not qualify as job work in the first place because the jewelry is being provided by an unregistered person. So there is no need to provide or follow the job work compliances strictly applicable to job work as per section 143. Having said that, as I explained, in relation to your invoice that you raise on your customer, you cannot apply 5% GST because it's not job work. You will have to apply 18% GST.
Okay, yes, that was also in your presentation. It was given in detail.
Right.
The next
there has to be some irrecoverable process loss while making jewelry by artisan. Shall it be construed as part of consideration and attract GST? No, the process loss that genuinely arises, which is irretrievable, which is a normal loss, that can only be accounted for when you file your ITC 04. You have to report that, but on that there is no GST because there's nothing that actually is being retained by the Karigar in that sense.
And next again, as per FTP norms, there are certain wastage norms in the FTP. So can that be taken for domestic as well?
So that is what the Advanced Ruling Authority, which I referred to, has done. They have stated that while it is only for exports, it can also be applied, but legally, it could only be a benchmark. It cannot be strictly imposed, but at the same time, it can be a benchmark, because if someone is claiming कि मेरा wastage 8% hai, while FTP provides 2.5, the department obviously will come down heavily and say that no, this is not possible. So it could be used as a benchmark. The last question for ITC 04, if the job worker sends goods to sub job worker for some work or full process of diamond, then who needs to file ITC for goods sent to job worker? So I have already answered that. As per the GST laws, it is the principal who has to file the ITC 04. But at the same time, as I told, GST law does not recognize the concept of subcontract, where principal is not aware that I have given the goods to someone else. If you want to still have that kind of transaction pattern, then maybe ITC 04 may not be filed for that leg, or may be filed by the job worker. But that is something which has to be contested with the GST authorities.
I think that is about all questions. Members, if they have any further question or any question later on also, they can address to GJEPC their questions, and we can get the response from Mr. Supreme Kothari and share with the member concerned.
Sure.
Any other question from any other member, please?
I think there's one more. No, I think no, there's no question. No question.
Thank you, Supreme.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. To the point. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, GJPC, for the opportunity. Thank you, Sudhir, for coordinating.
Thank you, Supreme, for joining session, throwing lights on the important aspects. I would also like to thank Google in the capacity of moderator. Really informative. I hope it was really informative.
Thank you all participants, and thank you, Supreme.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.